It's an hour before dawn on the Juyan frontier, in the desert north of what is now Gansu. The year is 95 BCE. There's a skin of ice on the water in your jar, and you break it with a knuckle before drinking. Your feet are cold inside wrapped cloth. The sky isn't light yet. Somewhere below the tower, a dog that belongs to nobody is awake, and so are you, and nothing else is moving for a very long way. There is no clock in this century, no bell, no weekend waiting at the end of anything, no wage that arrives as money, and no way, anywhere in your life, to be unaccounted for. So the question everyone asks about you is what you did all day. Stay with that for a second, because it is the wrong question. It assumes the day was shapeless, a long blur of labor between two darknesses. It wasn't. Your day had a form, and the form had names. And somebody else was writing them down. Here's what's coming in the next 20 minutes. A file of sick days a full year long, tied shut and labeled. A man out here who can't mend his own coat and has to ask. A lawsuit, argued in front of officials, about fish. A book, buried in a coffin, that tells you how to get out of bed. And a ration list that feeds you more when the work is heavier. By the end of this you'll understand something about the shape of your own working day, and about who keeps the record of it, that will be difficult to put back down. Let's go. Think about what's already in your head when somebody says ancient China. A first emperor, a wall, an army of clay soldiers standing in rows underground. A philosopher with a beard saying something about fathers and sons. Battles, then a new dynasty, then more battles. Not one of them is a Tuesday. That picture isn't a lie, but it is an inheritance. And inheritances come from somewhere. Almost everything written about early China that survived above ground survived because scholar officials chose to copy it, and then their students copied the copy, for 2,000 years, each generation deciding what was worth the labor. Dynasties were worth it. Dinner was not. Even the historian that everyone still leans on complained about how little was left to him. Writing around 100 BCE, Sima Qian said the records of the Qin were thin, gave no dates, and were not specific. That is one man's verdict on his own sources. And the broader claim that the surviving record leans hard toward the throne room is an argument rather than a measurement, so carry it lightly when you hear it repeated. What we inherited from that civilization is its funeral home, and we have been walking around inside it assuming it's the whole building. The rest of the building exists. It was thrown away instead of carved, and thrown away things end up in specific places. One of those places is a well in Hunan. Hold on to that well, because everything you are about to hear runs through it. So here's the machinery that makes the rest of this possible. Early China left two separate channels of writing, and they do not always agree. The first channel is books, histories, classics, the texts copied forward by hand across 2 millennia. Every sentence in them passed through somebody who decided that you, eventually, should read it. The second channel is paperwork, thin strips of wood and bamboo, 1 column of characters each, tied together with string into rolls. The average strip runs about 23 centimeters. That's 9 inches, and if you're American, picture a slightly long dinner knife. Paperwork rots. It survived in only 3 kinds of place: bone-dry desert sand, the airless, waterlogged mud of southern tombs, and the bottom of a well. Every one of those is an accident, and you are the beneficiary. In 1930, a joint Chinese and Swedish expedition, working the dry riverbed country of Juyan, pulled 346 strips out of a ruined fort, and more than 10,000 followed. A second campaign in the 1970s brought up tens of thousands more. There is a third pile. Between 1990 and 1992, at a relay station near Dunhuang, archaeologists lifted more than 35,000 strips out of the sand. Its expense ledgers are still legible. Then, in 2002, in Longshan County in Hunan, an emergency dig ahead of a hydropower project reached the bottom of a well and found over 36,000 strips. They carry more than 200,000 characters. This is the working paperwork of one county called Qianling. Duty rosters, grain receipts, complaints. None of it was filed for posterity, and nobody who wrote a word of it pictured you reading it over their shoulder. Entry 1. The day had a shape, and the shape was a form. Everything you do out here turns into paper. Specialists sorting the Juyan material have grouped it into categories, and the list runs longer than you would like. rosters of who is currently on strength, registers of who is sick, and records of the daily patrol. Registers of work performed, inventories of weapons and equipment, ledgers of the clothing and grain issued to you, a separate ledger for the grain issued to your family, salt, post horses, hay, grain in transit, and a sheet scoring how fast letters moved through your stretch of the line. Look at that list again and notice what it actually is. It is not a chronicle of anything. It is a payroll department, a supply depot, and a personnel office running out of a mud brick tower in a desert in the 1st century. One of those inventories came out of the sand still tied shut. Nobody had opened it since the day it was rolled up, which is a strange thing to be able to say about a document. Unrolled, it measures 91 centimeters of bound strips, roughly 3 feet of continuous list, and the hand that wrote it was working somewhere between 93 and 95 of the Common Era. It is an equipment audit. Weapons, counted and assessed, filed, and then forgotten so completely that the string held. The nearest modern object to it is an asset register sitting on a shared drive somewhere. The difference is that this one has been lying in the open for 19 centuries and is still legible. Behind all of this sits one obligation that is much harder to pin down. The standard line is that an adult man owed the state a month of labor every year on top of military service, and you will find that month repeated everywhere. I want to be straight about it. No single fixed regulation has ever been found. The demands seem to have moved with whatever the state needed that season, and specialists are still openly arguing about how the whole system worked. Hold the month loosely. What is not loose, and what nobody argues about, is that somebody wrote down whether you turned up. Entry 2. Being ill had its own filing system. Among the Juyan material is a small wooden label, the kind that hung off a bundle of strips to tell a clerk what it contained. A spine label, essentially, for a box file. Slow down for this one. Read what the label says. It announces a record of the sickness and recovery of officers, including their return to duty, running from the 1st month through to the 12th. The year is 23 before the Common Era. 12 months of being unwell, tied into a bundle and labeled on the outside so that it could be found again. Notice the third thing on that label. Not only who fell ill, not only who got better when they went back to work. That is a metric. It is the same number a modern employer tracks, under a different name, and it was already being written down with a brush on a strip of wood. So what was actually wrong with them? A study reading the medical entries across the Juyan and Dunhuang strips found that the most common complaint is not the one you would guess. It is not exposure, and it is not hunger. It is injury, and specifically wounds taken in armed quarrels between the men themselves. Second is a fever with chills and a headache. There is a well-known claim that officials in this period got 1 day off in every 5, because they were effectively living at their offices and needed a day to go home and wash. That claim comes from a book about court procedure, describing senior men in the capital, and no excavated document I know of confirms it. Demote it from a fact to a report and carry it that way. What the strips do confirm is narrower than that and stranger than that. Your recovery was not a private event between you and your body. It was a line item, opened in 1 month and closed in another. And somewhere in that bundle sits the distant ancestor of the doctor's note, which exists then as it does now mainly to reassure an administrator. Entry 3. Your day had a price, and the price was grain. Nobody out here is paid in anything you could spend. You are fed, and the feeding is itemized. Working through the ration documents from Juyan, one historian put the range at a little over 1 measure of grain per person per month at the bottom, and a little over 3 at the top. 3 variables moved you along that scale: age, sex, standing. The top of it is nearly 3 times the bottom. That is not a rounding difference. It is the gap between a full stomach and a thin one. Somebody built that scale. Somebody applied it to a named human being, every month, and filed the result. A modern salary band chart is this document's descendant, and the only real difference is that this one is denominated in food. Your relatives were on the same books. Grain issued to the families of serving men has its own ledger category, which means the state was feeding people who had never held a weapon and was counting every measure of it. Now go south, to the county whose paperwork ended up at the bottom of a well. Among those strips are the grain allocations for convict laborers, and the number is not flat. It moves with the kind of work the person is doing. Heavier work, larger ration. None of these people chose the work. They were sentenced to it, and the sentence arrived with a calorie allowance attached. Stay on that for a second, because of what it requires. Somebody had to compare two kinds of labor, judge which one costs a body more, and convert the difference into food. That is not cruelty, and it is not kindness. It is accounting, performed on people who appear in no history of anything, whose entire surviving trace on this earth is the number of measures it took to keep them working one more month. A clerk did that arithmetic at a desk, wrote it out, and went to his own dinner. The strangest thing in this archive is the next one, and it is not a number. Entry 4. Somewhere in the Juyan material, a man called Yuan Chang is writing to a friend called Zi Hui. He has a problem, and it is not a military problem. His clothes are torn and he cannot mend them himself. He would like to know whether Zi Hui could lend him an old short garment. That is the whole letter. A grown man on the edge of an empire, asking a friend for something to wear, and writing it out on one of those 9-inch strips because there was no other way to ask. Here is the honest caveat, and you should have it before the feeling settles. I have this letter through a museum exhibition and the reporting around it, not through a scholarly edition that can be checked line by line. So hold the exact wording loosely and hold the man firmly, because the category is not in doubt at all. Private letters are one of the things these towers produced, and they keep turning up. The same sand gave up a great deal that is not administration. Notes about money owed, sheets of writing practice, the same character again and again down the wood. Beginner's primers, the kind you learn to read from. Multiplication tables, lines copied out of the classics, medical prescriptions, and a short text explaining how to tell a good sword from a bad one. Somebody in a desert tower wanted to know how to judge a blade, and wrote the answer down. Look at that pile and tell me what it is. It is the contents of somebody's desk drawer, not a state drawer, a person's. The men in these towers were not only watching a horizon, they were studying, borrowing, owing, self-medicating, and practicing their handwriting, and all of it was going onto wood, because wood was what they had. Yuan Chang did not know you existed. He was asking for a coat. 2,000 years later you are standing behind him reading it over his shoulder, and the only reason you can is that nobody thought it was worth keeping. Which raises an obvious question. What happened out here when two men fell out over money? Entry 5. In 1974, excavation at the Juyan sites lifted 36 wooden strips out of the ground. 4 years later they were published. They are not administration, they are a lawsuit. In the year 28 of the Common Era, an officer of the garrison brought a civil claim against a commoner named Ku En. A bailiff called Gong served the summons on the 30th of January. A commoner is taking part in a formal legal process here, and his statement is written down and kept. The case survives whole. The claim, the summons, the statements taken, the findings recorded. Inside it sits one line that changes the temperature of the whole document. Ku En's son had worked for the officer for 100 days, catching fish, and had been given nothing for it, unpaid. 100 days of a young man's life, entered into the record as a set-off against his father's debt. Specialists still read the officer's surname two different ways. At least one argues that these 36 strips are only part of a longer file. So the man who brought the case has half lost his name. Ku En kept his. That is the whole of his appearance in history. Take the sun's side of it for a moment. You are on the water before the light, every day, for 100 days. The river does not know about the case, and at the beginning, neither do you. The work is cold, and the work is repetitive, and at no point is any of it yours. Your labor has already been spent. It was spent before you started, in an argument between two older men about a debt you did not incur, and it will be reported afterwards, in a sentence you will never read. Nobody pays you. Nobody was ever going to. And the reason a stranger knows about your 100 days at all is not that anybody thought them worth remembering, but that an officer wanted his money back, and the file was thorough, and the file was thrown away. I told you near the start that there was a well in Hunan, and that everything would run through it. This is where that gets paid back to you. Longshan County, 2002. A hydropower project, an emergency dig, a shaft going down through mud, and at the bottom of it the working files of a county called Qianling. Over 36,000 strips, carrying more than 200,000 characters. Now set that beside Sima Qian, writing about a century after the Qin fell, with the imperial collections open to him, He said the records were thin, undated, and not specific. He was right about everything he could reach. For 2,000 years that stayed the settled position, and the daily texture of the period was treated as simply gone. Then the well opened. What came out of it was not a lost chronicle. It was rosters, receipts, ration schedules, complaints, delivery logs. Here is the turn, and it is the whole reason you are still watching. The hole in the record was never the absence of an answer. The hole is the answer. Nothing about their day went unwritten. Their day was documented so completely, so relentlessly, by so many people with brushes, that the documentation itself became refuse. Refuse goes into wells, and wells keep things. And the question the state was actually asking was never the question in the title of this video. Nobody in that county office wanted to know what you did all day. They wanted to know whether your day could be proved. One more thing, because it changes the shape of everything already said. In December 1983, at a place called Zhangjiashan, a tomb numbered 247 was opened. The man inside had been a junior legal official. Buried with him were a statute book, a set of case records, and a mathematics manual. And one more volume, 113 bamboo strips, roughly 3,200 characters, written around 166 before the Common Era. It is called Yin Shu, which translates to something like the pulling book, and what it actually is a manual for how to be a body. How to get up, how to wash, what to eat, how to sleep, how to move, and how every one of those should change with the season. One man, two accounts of the same day, the one the state kept on him, and the one he kept on himself, and he took both of them into the ground. So there are three things worth carrying out of this. First, the day was not a blur, it was a form. When somebody asks what an ordinary person did all day 2,000 years ago, the honest answer is not a paragraph of atmosphere, it is a list of document types. Duty rosters, sick registers, ration ledgers. Equipment audits, delivery scores. Those categories were the day as the state saw it, and they are the only view of it that survived intact. A life reduced to its filing categories sounds like a loss, and in a way it is. It is also the single reason any of that life is visible now. Second, all of it arrived through indifference. Not one of these documents was preserved on purpose. They went into a well, into sand, or into a tomb, and geology did the rest. The things early China deliberately kept, the histories and the classics and the stone inscriptions, tell you about rulers. The things it threw out tell you about people. So the sharpest picture anyone has of daily life in that world is assembled entirely from objects that nobody at the time gave a second thought to. Turn that around and hold it up to your own life. Whatever is being logged about you right now, in some system you never think about, is the part with the best chance of outliving you. Your expense reports have a stronger claim on immortality than your opinions do. Third, and this is the one that stays, stop looking for the distance between them and us in the work itself. A man on a frontier fills in a form about his own illness. He draws a fixed ration. He argues about a debt, borrows a coat because his own is torn, and practices his handwriting in the evening because he wants to be better at it. Strip away the sand and the bamboo, and that is a working life you would recognize from the inside. The gap is somewhere else entirely. It always was. It is in who holds the record, how much of it there is, and whether the person described in it ever gets to read a word of it. Kuen's son never read his 100 days. Somebody wrote them down anyway, and that is why you know. Here is the part I keep going back to. It is an hour before dawn again, and you are back in the tower. The skin of ice on the jar. The cold feet. The dog below that belongs to nobody. Somewhere beside you, on a shelf or in a basket, there is a blank strip of wood. 9 inches long, cut and smoothed and waiting for a brush. Before the light is properly up, somebody is going to pick it up and write on it. Your name may well be on it. It may say that you were sick, or that you turned up, or that you owe a man money, or that your coat came late. You will never see the finished document. It will be checked, copied, filed, superseded, and thrown into a pit, and that is precisely why it is still here. Now come back to tonight. In the next few hours, you will do something completely unremarkable, and it will leave a record behind it. A card tap, a badge swipe, a message with a timestamp welded to it. A man in that tower did the same thing with a brush and a piece of wood, and out of the two of you, His is the version that has already lasted 2,000 years. So, the question, would you take the trade? Every hour of your day counted, rationed, and filed by somebody who is not you. And in exchange, a stranger 20 centuries from now says your name out loud, the way people now say Yuan Chang and Cohen. Nothing of yours kept private, and nothing of yours lost. Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.